The lecture hall of the Galactic Defense Academy was larger than any human building Arya Cole had ever seen. The ceiling arched high above like a cathedral of metal and light. Alien cadets of every shape and color filled the seats, scaled, furred, feathered, or covered in chitin, and in the middle of them sat one human, small, alone. Lieutenant Arya Cole kept her back straight and her eyes forward. She had learned not to react. The others whispered and stared, their voices low but not low enough. "That's the human. She looks so fragile. They say her kind still eats meat, real meat." How primitive. Arya had heard it all before. Every alien in this academy looked at her the same way, like she didn't belong, like a mistake that somehow learned to walk upright. At the front of the hall stood Instructor Ralver, a towering, blue-skinned creature with a bony ridge running down his skull. He was from the world of Tassar Prime, a species known for strength and pride. His voice rumbled through the room like thunder. "Today," he said, "we discuss species warfare theory, how each race adapts to survive battle. You will learn not only your strengths but your weaknesses." His yellow eyes swept the crowd, then stopped on Arya. "Let us begin with the human." Every head turned toward her. Arya didn't blink. She sat still, though her heart began to pound. Ralver's lips pulled back, showing sharp teeth. "Lieutenant Cole, your species evolved on a Class 3 death world, did it not?" "Yes, sir," she said evenly. "And your people are carnivores?" "Omnivores, sir," she corrected quietly. He tilted his head, pretending to think. "Meaning you eat animals." A few cadets hissed and muttered. Some covered their faces in mock disgust. One even laughed aloud. Arya's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir, we eat what we can." The instructor's tone turned mocking. "How savage! Do you truly believe such instincts help you in warfare?" Arya looked up at him. "Yes, sir, I do." The room erupted in laughter. Clicking tongues, growls, the sound of scales slapping against seats. Ralver raised a claw for silence, though his mouth curved in amusement. "Do enlighten us, Lieutenant. How does your primitive appetite give you an edge against superior species?" Arya rose to her feet, slowly, calmly. She was smaller than all of them, but her voice carried through the room. "It's not the eating, sir, it's the hunger." The laughter faltered. She continued, eyes steady. "Humans evolved in a world that tried to kill us every day. We learned to chase prey for hours, for days, until it dropped. We learned to use fire to cook, tools to hunt, and teamwork to survive. We learned that nothing stronger or faster could stop us, because we never stop." The room was silent. Ralver blinked once, then smiled coldly. "Such confidence. Tell me, Lieutenant, do you also believe this? Hunger will save you when you face a Karn, warbeast, or a Trinax hunter drone." Arya met his gaze. "Yes, sir, because we don't quit, not when we're scared, not when we're dying, not ever." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence was sharp. Then the instructor chuckled. "How dramatic! Sit down, Lieutenant." Arya did, slowly, calmly. Inside, her hands were trembling. Ralver turned back to the board. "Let us continue with a species that truly represents military evolution, the Vrex Hunters." His voice faded into background noise. Arya stared straight ahead, not seeing the holographic diagrams or listening to the droning lecture. She could still feel the laughter pressing against her skin like heat. She wasn't here to argue. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to prove them wrong. When class ended, the aliens poured out of the hall, chattering and laughing. Arya stayed behind, cleaning her datapad, waiting until they were gone. A tall, furred cadet paused near her desk. Tarn Kale, the one who'd laughed loudest earlier. "You really believe all that, human?" he asked, voice half curious, half teasing. Arya didn't look up. "Believe what?" "That you're dangerous because you're hungry." She finally met his eyes. "No," she said softly, "because I know what happens when I'm cornered." Kale hesitated, then snorted. "You'll need that attitude. Next week's exam is survival training, real wilderness, no drones, no instructors." "Good," she said. Kale gave a low rumble that might have been a laugh or a warning. "We'll see if your hunger keeps you alive, little human." He turned and left. When the door closed, the silence returned. Arya stood, gathered her things, and walked out into the long, dim corridor. The walls hummed with the sound of energy flowing through the station. Outside, the windows stretched a sea of stars, cold, endless, beautiful. She stopped before the glass, her reflection small against the void. The stars shimmered in her eyes like sparks. She whispered to herself, "Let them laugh." Back on Earth, her people had hunted creatures that could crush them, had survived ice ages and storms, had crossed oceans in wooden boats. The galaxy thought humans were weak because they looked soft, because they smiled too easily, because they talked instead of roared. But hunger lived in their bones. And hunger didn't need approval. Hunger won. Behind her, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Instructor Ralver. He stopped beside her, looking out the same window. "You are ambitious, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "But ambition is not enough. This academy will break you." Arya kept her eyes on the stars. "It's broken better things before." Ralver gave a low, cold laugh. "We'll see how long that human spirit lasts when the wilds test you." She turned to face him. "We'll see, sir." He walked away, leaving her alone again. For a moment she just stood there. Then she pressed her hand to the glass. The stars looked distant and cruel, but they didn't scare her. If the galaxy wanted to test her, it would learn something new about humans. They didn't run from the dark. They came from it. And when the time came, she'd show them exactly what hunger looked like. The son of Vordrek IX was a cruel red giant that painted the world in blood-colored light. The planet was a jungle of teeth and shadows, wet, thick, and alive. Every tree dripped with vines that hissed when cut. Every sound could mean death. It was perfect for the Galactic Academy's final exam. 50 cadets stood in a row on the landing field as shuttles hummed behind them, engines hot and impatient. The air stank of oil and ozone. Above, great shapes moved in the mist, predators watching from the tree line. Instructor Ralver paced in front of the line, his claws tapping against the metal deck. His voice boomed over the noise. "This is your survival trial. You will each be dropped into different zones of the Vordrek wilds. You must reach the extraction point within 7 days. Alone." Murmurs rippled through the ranks. "You may use your wits, your training, and your species' gifts," Ralver continued. "Weapons will be limited, assistance none." He stopped in front of the human. Lieutenant Arya Cole stood straight in her dark survival uniform. Sweat already clung to her hairline, but her expression was calm. Ralver looked her up and down. "Lieutenant," he said, voice cold, "you still believe your species? Hunger gives you an advantage." "Yes, sir," she said. He handed her a small pack. It was lighter than she expected, too light. Inside was a combat knife, a single flare, and a ration bar. That was all. No rifle, no scanner, no armor plating like the others had. A few alien cadets chuckled. "Guess they finally found the right diet for her," one whispered. Arya ignored them. She tied the pack to her belt and checked the knife's edge. Sharp, reliable, that was enough. Ralver moved down the line, passing out gear to others. Energy rifles for the Trinax, plasma blades for the Tarn, tracking drones for the Vrex. When he finished, he turned back toward them, arms crossed. "Remember," he said, "the beasts of Vordrek are faster than you, stronger than you, smarter than you think. They hunt in packs. Many cadets do not return from this test." He let that sink in. "Begin." The engines roared to life, and one by one, the cadets were loaded into drop pods. The sky split with trails of fire as they launched toward the jungle below. When Arya's turn came, she stepped inside without hesitation. The hatch closed with a hiss. For a moment, all was silent except for her own heartbeat. Then the pod dropped. The descent was brutal. The pod shook and screamed against the atmosphere, metal groaning, heat blooming around her. When it hit the ground, it hit hard. Arya's body slammed into the harness. Her vision swam. For a few seconds, she could only hear the steady hiss of her own breathing. Then silence. She released the harness and pushed open the hatch. The jungle outside was alive with sound, screams, howls, the distant crash of something huge moving through the trees. The air was thick and wet, full of the smell of rot and blood. Perfect, she thought. She took a long breath, tasting iron on her tongue, then stepped out. The ground was soft, half-swamp, covered in roots that pulsed faintly with light. Every step squelched. The trees were massive, their bark black and slick, their leaves big enough to cover a shuttle. Arya looked up at the dark sky. The red sun was sinking behind thick clouds. Night would fall soon. She checked her map, an old-fashioned piece of folded hollow paper. The extraction point was nearly 50 kilometers north across unknown terrain. No trails, no signals, no help. She smiled faintly. "Just another walk," she whispered. By the second hour, the first beast found her. It crawled from the shadows, long, four-legged, with skin like wet stone and eyes that glowed blue. Its jaw split open sideways, rows of curved teeth glistening in the red light. Arya froze. Slowly, she raised her knife. The creature growled, a sound that shook the leaves. Then it leaped. She rolled aside as it slammed into the mud. It was fast, too fast. It turned, claws carving deep lines in the ground. Arya ran. Branches whipped her face, thorns cut her arms, but she didn't stop. She'd been running since the day she joined this academy, running from doubt, from mockery, from fear. She ran until she heard the creature close behind her, its breath hot against her neck. Then she dropped low and slid under a fallen log. The beast crashed into the trunk, dazed. Arya turned and plunged her knife into its throat. Hot black blood sprayed across her arms. The creature convulsed, then went still. Her heart thundered. She pulled the knife free, wiped it on the moss, and looked down at the body. "Thanks," she whispered. She dragged the carcass under the log, split it open, and began to work. Her movements were steady, practiced. She'd been trained for field survival, how to use every part of a kill. Soon, she had strips of meat hanging over a small fire made from flint and friction. The smell of smoke and blood filled the clearing. When the first piece was cooked, she tore it in half and chewed slowly. It tasted awful, bitter and oily, but it was fuel. She sat there as the firelight flickered across her face, her eyes glowing orange in the dark. In the distance, more howls echoed through the jungle, dozens of them. Arya licked her fingers clean. "Come on then," she murmured. "I've got enough for everyone." Hours later, a drone camera drifted through the trees, its lens whirring softly. It zoomed in on her camp, the fire, the bones, the human crouched low beside them. Arya looked up, meeting the camera's eye. She smiled faintly. Then slowly, she lifted one of the bones, stripped of flesh, and ran her tongue along it until it gleamed white. "Waste not," she said. Miles away in the control room, Instructor Ralver froze as the feed played across the screen. Around him, staff officers whispered in disbelief. She's eating the beasts. She's using their remains for tools. She's still alive." Ralver stared at the image of the small, blood-streaked human sitting alone beside the fire, surrounded by corpses. His voice was barely a whisper. "She's hunting them." And somewhere in the red wilds of Vordrek 9, Arya Cole smiled into the darkness, because for the first time she felt like she was home. Night on Vordrek 9 was a living nightmare. The air buzzed with strange voices, calls and replies, predator and prey locked in an endless conversation of death. The red sun had sunk hours ago, leaving only blackness and the cold shimmer of the moons above. Lieutenant Arya Cole crouched in the hollow of a fallen tree, knife clutched tight in her hand. The fire she had built earlier was gone, smothered to nothing but gray ash. The jungle didn't forgive light for long. Light meant attention, and attention meant death. Her body ached from running and fighting. Her arms were covered in scratches, her uniform torn and slick with dried blood, hers and others. Every sound made her tense. Every movement in the dark could be another beast. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was alert, focused. She was hunting now. By the end of the second day, most of the alien cadets' distress beacons had gone silent. Arya had seen flashes of light in the sky, emergency flares, one after another. Some burned for minutes. Others were snuffed out before they reached the clouds. She'd heard screams too, not human ones. When the first Academy drone had drifted overhead, scanning the jungle, she had waved lazily at it, still chewing on cooked meat. She knew the instructors were watching. She wanted them to see. Let them laugh again, let them call her savage. She'd show them what savage really meant. The jungle had changed since she arrived. The beasts hunted her now, learning her scent. They moved in groups 6, sometimes 7, circling her camp from the shadows. They were smart and fast and hungry. But so was she. Arya had learned their habits, their trails, their cries. She learned the rhythm of the forest. When the smaller things went quiet, the big ones were near. When the air grew still, something worse was coming. And she had adapted. She'd stripped bones for tools, used blood to mask her scent, and woven a crude spear from broken branches. Her knife never left her hand. She ate when she could, slept when she must, and kept moving. The rules of the academy didn't matter out here. The jungle had its own laws, and she was learning them fast. On the fourth night, the hunt turned. The pack had been tracking her for hours, their glowing eyes blinking through the trees like stars. She could hear them breathing, smell their foul breath on the wind. They thought she was running. She was. Arya crouched near a muddy ravine, her heartbeat steady, her muscles coiled. She dug shallow pits with sharpened sticks at the bottom, primitive but deadly enough. The beasts wouldn't expect traps. They never did. The first one came crashing through the brush, jaws wide. She waited until its claws sank into the mud, until it was too close to stop. Then she moved. She sidestepped and slammed the spear upward. It pierced the creature's throat, and momentum did the rest. The beast fell forward into the pit with a wet, cracking sound. The others roared behind it. Arya spun, knife flashing. She slashed one across the face, ducked under another's claws, then ran straight into the darkness. She didn't flee blindly, she led them. Step by step, she pulled them toward the canyon she'd scouted earlier. Branches snapped, leaves tore, the ground trembled under their weight. She reached the edge and stopped. The canyon dropped 50 meters into shadow. Mist swirled below, thick and glowing faintly blue. The pack surrounded her, snarling, 7 of them, massive and furious. Their bodies glowed faintly under the moonlight, slick with hunger. Arya took a deep breath. Her lungs burned, her arms shook, but her eyes were calm. "Come on then," she whispered. "Let's finish this." The first one lunged. She stepped aside, grabbed its forearm, and used its momentum to throw it over the edge. The others came at once, a storm of claws and teeth. She fought like a cornered animal, fast, low, ruthless. A claw tore into her shoulder. She stabbed blind, felt the blade sink deep. Another creature bit her leg, and she screamed, jamming her thumb into its glowing eye until it released her. Pain was fire in her veins, but she didn't stop. She never stopped. Humans didn't win by being the strongest. They won by being too stubborn to die. One by one, the beasts fell, slashed, burned, broken. Blood sprayed across her face, hot and metallic. The final one lunged from behind, jaws wide enough to bite through her head. She dropped low, caught a fallen bone spear from the ground, and drove it upward through the roof of its mouth. The creature froze, twitching, then collapsed beside her. For a long time, she just sat there, panting. Her body was shaking, her vision blurring, but her heart was steady. Around her lay the dead, 7 monsters, silent now. Arya pushed herself up, dragging her wounded leg. She stared at the canyon edge where the first had fallen. Somewhere far below, she could still hear the echo of its impact. She let out a long breath. "Guess I'm the apex now," she whispered. By morning, the sun bled through the mist again, painting everything in red. Arya sat near a small fire she'd built beside the canyon, her arm bandaged with torn fabric. She chewed on roasted meat slowly, staring at the rising smoke. She stopped counting how many kills she'd made. The number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she was still breathing. A sound buzzed above her, another academy drone. She looked up at it, squinting against the light. "Good morning," she said softly. The drone focused on her camp, recording every detail, the fire, the blood, the bones piled neatly beside her. Arya picked up one of the bones, still steaming, and tapped it against her teeth thoughtfully. "Still think we're primitive?" she asked the drone. Then slowly, she licked it clean. The camera zoomed closer, capturing every movement. Her expression was calm, her eyes bright and unbroken. Somewhere far away, in a cold control room full of silent officers, a blue-skinned instructor watched the footage. His claws trembled slightly as he whispered, "She's not surviving anymore, she's thriving." And in the wild heart of Vordrek 9, Arya Cole smiled, because the hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The jungle had gone quiet. Too quiet. Lieutenant Arya Cole moved carefully through the trees, every step measured, every sound deliberate. Her left leg throbbed with pain from the last fight, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Out here, stillness meant death. The red sun had burned low again, painting the thick mist in copper light. She'd been on Vordrek 9 for 5 days. 5 days without sleep, without backup, without mercy. She was bleeding, limping, starving. And still she was alive. That was more than most could say. When the first storm hit, it wasn't rain that fell but acid. The drops hissed on her skin, eating through cloth and burning wherever they landed. She threw herself under the thick leaves of a wide tree, teeth clenched as smoke curled from her arm. The pain was sharp, clean, and real. It reminded her she was still here. She tore a strip of cloth from her uniform, soaked it in mud, and pressed it over the burn. The cold soothed her for a moment. Above, thunder rolled. The sky screamed with lightning that split the jungle in flashes of white. She watched the fire that followed, crawling over the wet ground, devouring roots and vines until the smoke turned everything black again. The beasts wouldn't come out in this storm. That was her only blessing. For a while, she sat there, breathing hard, feeling the ache in her chest. She hadn't eaten since morning. The last of her rations were gone, and the meat she'd stored had spoiled in the humidity. Her stomach growled. Her mind whispered, "Keep moving." When the rain stopped, the forest smelled of ash and blood. Arya pushed forward, dragging her bad leg, knife ready. The ground was soft and slick with slime. Her vision blurred at the edges. She hadn't had water in hours. She stumbled once, twice, then fell hard against a root. The impact drove the air from her lungs. For a moment she just lay there, staring at the canopy above. The stars were faint, blurred behind clouds. "This is it, huh?" she whispered to no one, her voice cracked. "This is where they find what's left of me." A memory rose earth, snow falling against her face. Her mother's voice, "Don't stop, Arya, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." Arya shut her eyes and laughed once, a sound full of exhaustion. "Yeah," she murmured, "all right." She pushed herself up again. By the time she reached the edge of the canyon, her entire body was trembling. She circled back without realizing it. The air was cooler here, and below she could hear the whisper of a river. She needed water, food, rest. But before she could descend, the forest stirred. A low growl rolled through the air, deep enough to shake her bones. The ground trembled beneath her feet. Then it appeared, massive, monstrous, and silent. The Alpha. It was larger than the others she'd fought, twice as tall, with ridged black skin and eyes like molten gold. Its claws glowed faintly, coated with something that shimmered and hissed in the air. Arya froze, her pulse pounded. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The creature stepped closer, sniffing the air. Its jaws opened slowly, revealing teeth like daggers slick with saliva. It had been hunting her for days, she knew it. She'd seen its tracks, felt its eyes. Now it was done waiting. Arya backed toward the cliff edge, knife raised. Her voice came out hoarse. "Come on, then." The Alpha roared and charged. The impact hit like thunder. She dodged aside at the last second, the creature's claws ripping through the tree behind her. Bark exploded in all directions. Arya slashed at its leg, cutting deep into the joint. The beast screamed, spinning toward her with fury. It struck again, catching her across the chest. The blow threw her into the dirt, air bursting from her lungs. Pain flooded her body. She gasped, tasted blood. Her vision flickered. The Alpha stalked closer, slow and deliberate, savoring it. Arya rolled onto her back, raising the knife with both hands. "You think I'm prey?" she rasped. "That's your first mistake." The beast lunged. She jammed the knife upward into its mouth. The blade pierced through the soft roof and into the skull. The Alpha screamed and reared back, flinging her away. She hit the ground hard. The knife tore free from her hand, but the creature staggered, blood pouring from its mouth. Arya struggled to her feet, dizzy and shaking. She could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. The Alpha turned, enraged, and charged again. She didn't move this time. She didn't run. Instead, she pulled the flare from her belt, cracked it, and tossed it into the slick mud near her. The chemical fire burst to life, catching on the leaking acid from the storm. The ground ignited. A wall of flame roared upward, cutting between them. The Alpha didn't stop. It came straight through, skin burning, eyes wild. Arya screamed, grabbed her fallen knife, and met it head-on. She plunged the blade into its throat again and again until its roars turned to choking gasps. Finally, it collapsed. The fire crackled, the smoke rising around them both. Arya fell to her knees beside the body, every muscle trembling. The air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke. She looked down at her own hands, shaking, burned, covered in red, and laughed softly. "That's what hunger looks like," she whispered. Hours later, when the fire had died, she sat beside the cooling corpse. The jungle was silent again, as if even the beasts were in awe. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the creature's golden eyes. Not a cadet, not prey, not the joke they thought she was. Something else entirely. She pressed her palm against its still chest, feeling the faint heat beneath. "Thank you," she murmured. "You fought well." Then she stood, limping toward the canyon. The night wind lifted the smoke behind her, carrying the scent of victory. She didn't know if anyone was left alive out there. She didn't care. Tomorrow she would keep moving. Because humans didn't stop when they broke. They became the break. And Vordrek 9 would remember her. The morning after the battle, with the Alpha dawned in smoke and silence. Lieutenant Arya Cole woke with her back pressed against a tree, her chest bandaged with strips of scorched fabric. Every breath burned. The air around her stank of ash and blood, heavy and wet. The Alpha's corpse still lay a few meters away, blackened and enormous, steam rising from its cracked hide. Flies the size of her fingers buzzed around it. Arya forced herself to sit up. Pain screamed through her ribs, but she ignored it. She was used to pain now. Pain meant she was still alive. She reached for her knife. Its handle burned, the blade warped from the heat, but it was still sharp enough. She smiled faintly. "Good morning," she whispered to no one. The jungle was quieter now, too quiet. The smaller creatures had vanished, leaving only smoke and the distant sound of cracking trees. She moved slowly through the ruins of the forest, dragging her wounded leg. Every step left a trail of blood in the mud, but she didn't stop. Her eyes were fixed on the distant ridge, where, according to the map, the extraction beacon waited. 5 days down, 2 to go. She passed the charred remains of one of the alien cadets' camps. The smell of plasma and melted armor hung in the air. The ground was torn up and deep claw marks scarred the soil. No bodies, just blood. She crouched beside a broken rifle, running her fingers along the cold metal. "Guess you didn't make it," she murmured. Her reflection in the cracked barrel startled her for a moment. Her face was pale and streaked with soot, her eyes hollow but sharp. She barely recognized herself. The jungle had taken the cadet she'd been and left something harder. By midday, the sky began to darken again. Storm clouds gathered fast, rolling in from the horizon like a swarm. The air grew hot and heavy. Arya's instinct screamed something was coming. She climbed the ridge as fast as she could, pushing through thorns and mud. When she reached the top, the world opened before her. The canyon below glowed faintly blue, split by rivers of acid light. The trees beyond shimmered with motion. Dozens, no, hundreds of beasts moved through the valley, drawn by the smell of death and blood. Her breath caught. They were gathering. Not hunting her out of instinct anymore, hunting her because she'd challenged their alpha, because she'd killed their leader. They were coming to finish what she'd started. For a moment she felt the smallest spark of fear, the kind that made her chest tighten and her thoughts blur. Then beneath that fear, she felt something else. Calm. Purpose. "All right," she whispered. "You want me, come get me." She found the old wreck of a drop shuttle half buried in the mud near the canyon edge. The impact had split it in two, but the fuel tanks were still intact. Inside, she scavenged what she could, flares, wire, a cracked battery cell. The tanks smelled sharp and metallic, full of volatile fumes. She knew what she had to do. Humans had always been dangerous not because of size or speed, but because of fire, because they'd learned to control it, because they could turn the wild itself into a weapon. As she worked, her hands trembled from exhaustion, but her focus was sharp. She mixed the fuel with the last of her ration paste, stirring it into a thick, oily gel. Homemade napalm. She filled a few torn packs with it, tied them with wires, and dragged them into position along the ridge. Below, the jungle shook. The beasts were near. Arya wiped sweat from her brow, lit the first flare, and whispered, "Time to eat." The first of the pack appeared over the rise, massive, snarling, eyes burning like molten stone. They saw her standing on the ridge, small and defiant, smoke swirling behind her. The biggest roared, shaking the air. The rest followed, claws tearing into the earth as they charged uphill. Arya waited until they were close, too close, then threw the flare into the soaked ground. The jungle exploded. Fire roared outward like a living thing, catching on vines, fuel, and flesh. The air became heat and noise. Beasts screamed and stumbled, their bodies igniting, their hides blistering. Arya stood in the middle of it, the flames painting her face in gold and red. When one of the burning creatures broke through the fire line and lunged at her, she didn't back away. She met it with a roar of her own, driving her knife into its chest. The fire wrapped around them both, consuming everything. She kicked the creature free, gasping for air. The heat was unbearable, the smoke thick, but she refused to fall. She grabbed a fallen bone spear and hurled it into the charging mass below. Another explosion followed as it struck one of the fuel packs. The firestorm climbed higher, spreading faster, until the whole ridge was an inferno. For a heartbeat, it looked like the end of the world. And in the center of it, Arya Cole stood, silhouetted against the flames, knife raised, eyes wild and bright. When it was over, nothing moved. The jungle was ash and smoke. The beasts were gone, burned to shadows on the earth. The ground hissed under the rain that began to fall again, cooling the scorched soil. Arya fell to her knees, coughing, lungs raw from the smoke. Her uniform was half burned, her hair singed, her skin streaked with soot. But she was still breathing. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked around. The ridge was quiet again, the air filled only with the soft patter of rain. Steam rose from the ground in thin white lines. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a charred metal tag, the Academy insignia, and stared at it for a long time. Then she laughed, a low, broken sound that turned into a breathless smile. "Still standing," she whispered, "still hungry." Hours later, a drone camera found her again. It hovered silently above the burnt ridge, recording the scene below, the fire's aftermath, the fallen beasts, and the lone human sitting among the ashes, sharpening her knife. She looked up at it, eyes steady, rain running down her face. "You watching, Instructor?" she said softly. "This is what hunger looks like." Then she leaned back against a rock, the storm washing the soot from her hands, and closed her eyes for the first time in days. Vordrek 9 was still burning, but she had survived the fire. Because she was the fire. The extraction shuttle landed in silence. Its metal hull hissed as it touched the scorched ground, steam rising from the wet soil of Vordrek 9. The doors opened slowly, releasing a gust of clean, cold air that didn't belong to this world. Inside, Instructor Ralver stood with two armored medics, scanning the devastation that stretched for miles. The jungle was gone, reduced to black earth and drifting smoke. What had once been alive now lay dead and still. The instructor's mandibles twitched. "No one could have survived this," one of the medics whispered. Ralver said nothing. He stepped down onto the ash. His heavy boots sank into the soot, leaving deep impressions behind. His eyes scanned the horizon. Then far ahead, he saw movement. A figure was climbing the ridge, slow, limping, wrapped in smoke and rain. Ralver's heart skipped. "By the stars," he murmured. Lieutenant Arya Cole looked like a ghost. Her uniform was burned to rags, her face streaked with soot and dried blood. Her hair hung in damp clumps against her neck. Each step looked like it might be her last, but still she moved forward. Behind her, the remains of the beasts lay scattered. Charred skeletons, half-melted armor plates, and blackened ground that still glowed faintly red from the heat. When she reached the shuttle, she stopped just short of the ramp. Her knife was still in her hand, its blade dull and chipped. She dropped it with a soft clang. "Lieutenant Cole," Ralver said quietly, stepping forward. You're alive." Arya's voice was rough, cracked from smoke. "You sound surprised, sir." He looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were sharp, fierce, but something in them had changed. There was no fear, no hesitation, only calm. "You destroyed the entire region," Ralver said. "We lost contact with every other cadet, the sensors." "They're gone," she said flatly. "The beasts, the cadets, everything." Silence hung between them. The rain began to fall again, washing the ash from her skin. The medics approached, but she raised a hand. "Don't," she said. "I can walk." She limped up the ramp slowly, leaving a trail of blood behind her. Ralver followed in silence. The shuttle lifted off. Through the small window, Arya watched the planet shrink below, once green and alive, now gray and silent. She should have felt relief, maybe pride, but she didn't. She felt empty. All the faces from the academy flashed through her mind, the ones who'd mocked her, the ones who'd laughed when she said hunger was strength. None of them had made it. For a long time, no one spoke. The hum of the engines filled the cabin like a heartbeat. Then Ralver broke the silence. "Do you understand what you've done, Lieutenant?" Arya didn't look at him. "I survived." "You did more than that," he said, voice low. "You adapted. You turned the entire ecosystem against itself. You burned the wilds clean." She said nothing. He leaned closer. "You broke every rule of the exam." "Then your rules were wrong." He stared at her for a long moment, his mandibles twitching in disbelief. Then slowly a strange sound escaped him, a soft laugh. "You humans," he said, "you are madness wrapped in flesh." Arya turned her head and met his gaze. "No, sir, we're just hungry." When they returned to the Galactic Defense Academy, the docking bay was full. Hundreds of cadets, officers, and technicians stood waiting as the shuttle doors opened. The sound of chatter filled the air, excitement, disbelief, fear. The survivors from other zones had already been brought back. Out of 50 cadets, only 12 had made it to extraction. Arya was the last. As she stepped down the ramp, silence spread through the crowd. Every eye turned toward her, the small, blood-stained human who'd walked out of a firestorm. Ralver followed a few steps behind her, his expression unreadable. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp and looked around. The faces staring at her weren't mocking anymore. They were afraid. She could feel it, the way they stepped back slightly, whispering. The way their eyes darted from her scars to the academy insignia still pinned to her torn collar. She didn't blame them. She barely recognized herself either. The commander of the academy, a tall, silver-skinned alien with translucent eyes, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Cole," he said slowly, "you are the only cadet to complete the survival exam in the Vordrek Wilds this cycle." Arya stood straight. "Yes, sir." "You were observed using unapproved methods. You consumed the local fauna. You used fire as a weapon. You destroyed large portions of the testing zone." "Yes, sir." He tilted his head. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Arya met his gaze. "I did what I had to do. I adapted. I survived." The commander studied her for a long time. Then finally he nodded once. "Then you did exactly what the exam was meant to teach." A murmur spread through the crowd. He turned toward the watching cadets. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "Do not underestimate the human species. They may look weak, but when they are cornered, they do not surrender. They evolve." He looked back at her. "Lieutenant Cole, you pass." The hall erupted in noise, some applause, some disbelief. Arya didn't smile. She only nodded, turned, and walked past them all, her boots echoing on the metal floor. Ralver caught up to her as she reached the corridor. "You've changed," he said softly. She looked at him. "So have you, sir." He paused. "I laughed at you once," he admitted. "I thought your kind was weak, uncivilized. I was wrong." Arya gave a small, tired smile. "We get that a lot." He extended a clawed hand. After a moment, she shook it. His grip was firm, almost respectful. "Rest, Lieutenant," he said. "You've earned it." Arya nodded and turned away. As she walked down the quiet hall, the weight of everything finally began to sink in. The pain, the fire, the silence of all who didn't return. Her hand brushed the small metal tag at her collar. She closed her fingers around it. "I told you," she whispered under her breath, voice almost lost in the hum of the corridor. "We don't stop." Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, another world waited to test her again. And when it did, the galaxy would remember the woman who came back from the fire. Not as prey, but as a predator. The lecture hall was silent. It was the same hall where Lieutenant Arya Cole had once stood, surrounded by laughter and disbelief. The same shining metal walls, the same scent of ozone and cold air, but everything felt different now. At the front of the room stood Instructor Ralver, his blue armor gleaming under the lights. His posture was stiff, formal, but his voice carried something new, something heavy. "Today's topic," he began, "is human warfare instinct." A ripple of confusion moved through the cadets. The new recruits were young, bright-eyed, and untested. Some whispered to each other, others smirked. One bold cadet raised a scaled hand. "Sir, with respect, why study the humans? Their methods are primitive, are they not?" Ralver's gaze locked on him. The cadet fell silent. Once, the instructor said quietly, "I thought the same." He tapped a control on his wrist. The lights dimmed. A hologram flickered to life in the air, a human silhouette surrounded by flames. It was grainy footage pulled from the recordings of the Vordrek survival exam. Gasps filled the hall as the image sharpened. A woman standing among burning trees, knife in hand, eyes wild and alive. "This," Ralver said, "is Lieutenant Arya Cole, the first human to not only survive the Vordrek wilds but to conquer them." The hologram shifted again, showing flashes of her fights, her traps, her firestorm, beasts burning, shadows moving through smoke, and the human, bloodied and unbroken, standing tall. "She did what no one else could," Ralver continued. "She adapted faster than the environment could kill her. She hunted the hunters. She made fire from dirt and fuel and turned the deadliest planet in this sector into her weapon." He paused, letting the images burn themselves into the cadets' minds. "She was tested beyond reason," he said softly, "and when everything civilized in her was stripped away, what remained was unstoppable." At the back of the hall, the door slid open with a hiss. The cadets turned. A figure stepped through the doorway, scarred, quiet, her posture steady as stone. She wore the black uniform of a decorated officer now, the insignia of the Galactic Defense Corps shining faintly on her chest. "Arya Cole." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the hollow projector. Then Ralver's voice broke the silence. "Lieutenant," he said, nodding with respect, "you honor us." She gave a short nod in return. "I just came to listen, sir." "You've earned more than that," he replied. He stepped aside, motioning toward the podium. "They should hear it from you." Arya hesitated for a heartbeat. The last time she'd stood in this spot, the whole room had laughed. Now every pair of eyes watched her in awe. She took a slow breath and stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was calm, low, and clear. "I remember standing right where you are," she began. "I remember the laughter, the disbelief. I told everyone that hunger made humans strong, and no one believed me." A few cadets looked down, uneasy. Arya smiled faintly. It wasn't cruel, it was tired. "You don't have to believe me, but you should understand us." She turned, gesturing to the hollow image still flickering behind her. "That planet tried to break me. It sent everything it had: storms, beasts, hunger, pain. And when I ran out of food, when my body couldn't fight anymore, I stopped thinking like a soldier." She looked over the silent crowd. "I started thinking like a human." The words hung heavy in the air. "You see, we were never meant to win fights by being the biggest or fastest or strongest. Our world never gave us that luxury. We learned to win because we had to, because if we didn't, we'd die." She paused, scanning the room. "You call us predators, you're right, but not because we kill, because we refuse to die quietly." One of the cadets, a young Vrex with bright green scales, raised his hand timidly. "Lieutenant," he said, "were you afraid?" Arya's eyes softened. "Every second," she said. "But fear doesn't mean weakness. Fear keeps you sharp. It reminds you you're still alive." The cadet nodded slowly, his crest lowering in respect. Arya's gaze drifted toward Ralver. He was watching her silently, pride shining faintly behind his stern expression. She looked back to the class. "You will all face something one day that makes you want to quit, something that burns you, starves you, tears at your heart. You'll think you can't go any further." Her voice grew quieter, steadier. "That's when you'll find out what you really are." The room was so still that even the hum of the lights sounded loud. "Humans aren't special," she said softly. "We just learned the one truth the universe tries to hide. Everything that lives fights to stay that way. We just do it louder." Ralver stepped forward again, his voice steady. "That," he said, "is the lesson I once failed to understand. I mocked her once for her hunger, now I teach it." He looked at the class, his tone turning firm again. "When you face extinction, you will wish for a human beside you, not because they're powerful, but because they never stop fighting." He turned to Arya. "Would you agree, Lieutenant?" Arya gave a faint smile. "Mostly," she said, "but I'd say it differently." She stepped back, standing tall, her silhouette framed against the fatting hologram. "When everything else in you dies," she said, voice low and steady, "remember this: humans don't fight because they want to win." She paused, her eyes shining. "We fight because we're hungry." For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly the cadets rose to their feet. One by one they began to clap, not polite applause, but raw, heavy, thunderous sound that filled the hall. Ralver bowed his head slightly. Arya stood there, quiet and still, a small smile ghosting across her face. Outside the academy, the stars gleamed like cold fire. Somewhere beyond them, another world waited, another storm, another test. She would go when the call came. She always would. Because that's what it meant to be human. To burn, to endure, and to never ever stop. And as the lights dimmed, the last words she spoke that day became legend in the academy archives, carved into the walls for every cadet to see. We don't stop, we adapt, we survive.